So today we're going to be talking about what's really being talked about all over the world right now in all different traditions, all different corners of the world, different spiritual traditions, different even traditions. There's this common discussion about moving from a 3D Earth to a 5D Earth. And there's a lot of different terminology being used for that. 5D Earth is often described as Christ consciousness or like a new heaven and new earth. And there's much talk about the splitting of these two dimensions or densities, right? The the 3D density and the 5D density. And it's happening because we're at the end of an age. And there's always a big shift at the end of every 2,000 year age, like from Taurus to Aries, and then from Aries to Pisces. That happened about 2,000 years ago. And then from now, we're going from Pisces to Aquarius, but we're also at the end of this huge, great year, this 24, 26,000 year great cycle, known to scientists and astronomers as the Great Recession. But it's known in the Vedic tradition and the Mayan calendars and the Aztec calendars, and the Hopi are aware of it, and just many and all these different traditions are aware of it. But what I'm going to be addressing, what I invite us to talk about tonight, is how do we move from 3D to 5D, right? And the idea is that these two realities are going to slowly part. And if someone wants to stay in the 3D reality, they can. And if someone wants to move to the 5D reality, they can. But rather than having this huge, like, zombie apocalyptic event that just, catastrophically shakes up the whole world, and it takes, at least a few hundred years, if not thousands of years to reset. The idea is that this transition is going to be, or could be, a smooth transition if we want it to be. Because remember, we are creators of our own reality individually, but we're also creators of our reality collectively. And we get to decide collectively what it's going to look like. But I want to go over just some of the few basics about what these terms are: 3D, 4D, 5D, because they get tossed around a lot. And there's often the assumption that we all know what we're talking about. But I want to just share from my perspective, after reading deep and going deep into a lot of different traditions, understanding of them. They all differ in some particularities, but there's some core similarities, some quintessential qualities that I feel can be stated simply. And the simpler that something can be stated without losing its essence, I think the best. So let's just go over this real quickly. So the 3D Earth, I'd say, is summed up with a drama triangle. And that drama triangle is made up of the victim, the villain, and the hero. And the way those stories work is there's a victim story, there's a villain story, and there's a hero story. And those roles don't really change, but they're more like musical chairs, and people just move from one to the next. And as long as we identify with one of them and project the others out onto other people, we get locked into this game of musical chairs, and we have been for thousands and thousands of years. So I imagine all of us can stand times where we've been in that victim story, and we can tell a story where we've been the victim. We can tell a story where we've been the villain. Maybe we see it as falsely being the villain, or maybe even accurately being the villain, and other times where we've been the hero. And then the key difference between the 5D and the 3D, or not a lot of people talk about 4D. They talk about going from 3D to 5D. But the 5D, the key elements, we could describe lots of them, but I would say the very basic elements of the 5D Earth is there's no judgment. This Christ consciousness, like Christ said over and over again, don't judge. If you judge, you're going to be judged. If you're going to be in this judging mentality, that keeps you locked here. And it's not like you get punished for judging. It's just that if you're going to judge, If you're going to use the sword's going to be used against you, because that thinking, you can't turn it off for yourself and turn it on for others. You can't turn it on for others and turn it off for yourself, and vice versa. So the fastest way to understand, okay, how can I do this? How can I get into the 5D earth? It's simply to suspend judgment. And secondly, it's to realize that everyone is sovereign. Each of us is sovereign, which means there's no one that is somebody else's hero. Like if I'm making Paul my hero, then I'm making him my sovereign, right? Or if I'm making someone else my villain, then I'm going to need to either find someone to be my hero, whether it's a political hero or a theological hero, someone to save me, someone to reach down and take care of me, right? And in exchange, whenever you have a king, you have to pay tax, right? You have to give some payment for having that role of sovereign be played by someone else. And so those are the key things. But what is it about 4D? What is 4D? 4D is really a state that just happens in the mind. And this is what I call the realm of meta narratives. And that can be in the form of a history, a mythology, a theology, scientific narrative. Meta narratives just mean narratives about the narratives. So narratives that describe all of these narratives, that describes who's the victim, who's the villain, who's the hero. Now, originally, the best of meta narratives, like mythologies and stories that are told within indigenous communities and mystery communities, the stories are the vehicles. They're like the maps to get from 3D to 5D, because there are certain portals one has to go through. It's like if you're going from the Earth to the moon, you're going to have to go through some atmospheric chambers where the pressures change and you're able to make those adjustments, because if you just make it all of a sudden, you're going to just explode. So the meta narratives are the device or the vehicle to move us into 5D. And an example of this, we can pull from this in any tradition, but you have the stories, they're told as a way, how do I move from being a victim, externalizing my hero, to internalizing my hero, right? And this is what is often called the hero's journey, right? Going from being a victim, facing the villain, becoming your own hero. And there are different stages to that. And that's why Joseph Campbell, he breaks it down into like 17 steps. I break it down into 4 major steps. Like you leave home and begin the adventure, you cross the threshold. This is the crossing the threshold. And then there's trials and tribulations. And you reach this point of despair because all these things that used to serve you are no longer going to serve you. And then you find your new self. Like you almost like have your head chopped off and you get a new head. And then you're able to be your own sovereign. But the best stories have pathways for the villain's journey, not just the hero's journey, but the villain's journey as well, and the victim's journey, to where we're able to leave behind our judgments and move into this truly lighthearted, non-judgmental, blameless state. Right? Now, the problem is that these meta narratives, a lot of times, if there's those that are saying, hey, I want you to stay in this victim, villain, hero, because, we're in this stage, let's say, and there's those that are benefiting from you being in that, and they're benefiting from you paying, they enjoy being the sovereign in this little fish tank, then they're going to not like any meta narratives that let you get out. Does that make sense? So they're going to take those meta narratives, especially the ones that are really successful in helping one exit and evolve and ascend into the 5D, and they're going to want to shut off those passageways. And so a lot of times these meta narratives that are meant to move us beyond get rewritten to stories that just reinforce that all there is victim, villain, hero. And that's why these stories are going to always pit people against each other, like saying there's always got to be an enemy, there's always got to be a villain, there's always got to be a bad guy and a good guy. And so the problem is we've had thousands of years of different ones with this secret. And the meta narratives are this magic. It actually is a magical space. The stories actually can carry you and be this transition to the 5D. But if there's all these meta narratives that are confusing us, for example, Christ came with this message of liberation and like, hey, you don't have to be serving anybody. You don't have to be worshiping anybody. Just you are divine. And that's the thing here. Nobody worships anybody in 5D because it's a community of sovereigns. Now, if that message gets out and someone's wanting to keep you in here, then they're going to try to either destroy those texts like they did with the Gnostic text, and they're going to try to destroy any community that's practicing that freedom path, that mystery ascension path. And if they can't destroy it, like they tried to destroy the Christ message for about 300 years, when they realized we can't, the Romans just said, okay, well, let's just take those stories and edit them so that Jesus he's not a liberator, he's the hero, and he's the one that's going to save you. You don't need to go anywhere. You stay right where you are. You just let a Messiah do this for you. And Christianity isn't the only tradition that's had a prophet be turned into a Messiah. The same thing happened with Buddha, and the same thing happened with Krishna, and the same thing happens with dozens and dozens of prophets and mystics and sages. So we just want to turn them into the hero rather than actually listen to what they're saying and entering into what they're saying. Okay, so in order to get from 3D to 5D, we have to have a meta narrative. But the problem is we live now in an age that's very suspicious of meta narratives. In fact, postmodernism, the definition of postmodernism by Jean-Luc Lyotard, back in the 70s, it started the whole postmodern movement. He said postmodernism is a suspicion of meta narratives. Because guess what? Whoever tells the story creates the reality. That's part of the magic. That's part of the secret knowledge, is that if you can have if you have the right story, the story creates reality, not the other way around. So all these meta narratives, whether it was political meta narratives or religious meta narratives, they all got used to control people and to keep people subservient and paying their taxes and making sure that they're kept down small and not realizing how divine they really are. So the suspicion of meta narratives comes to the point where people say, oh, knowledge isn't what sets us free. Knowledge is just power. Knowledge is just used to control people. So we're going to be suspicious of knowledge, any knowledge system that tells a big story, that tells a story about the stories. We're just going to get rid of those. And so you have, we've been in this age of suspicion, for at least the last century. And so that makes it even harder, right? So people just don't believe in metaphysics anymore. They don't believe in religion. They don't believe in big stories. They don't believe in things like beauty or truth, right? So that just becomes one more blockade, because now the very tool, that like the meta narrative is this boat that's going to take us across this river, but those boats kept being used as sort of slave trading boats. And so now people are all suspicious of getting on any boats. And so now there's another reason we're stuck. But at this point in the age, this shifting of the age, those meta narratives, those trolling, power mongering meta narratives are being disempowered. They're being exposed. And the revelation, the word apocalypse just means revealing. And so we're even now seeing all these people that we thought were great and doing great things for us and oh, actually they were deeply corrupt, you know. And so we're realizing that a lot of these meta narratives were used to control people. But what we need to do is to be able to pick out of the rubble, out of the ancient ruins, we have to find these meta narratives, these stories that can help carry us into a 5D, non judgmental, co sovereign reality, especially if we're going to do this collectively. Because in the past, it was so hard to get through here, especially with all these attempts to keep you locked down. It was very hard for someone to sort of climb out of the bucket, like this picture of a bunch of crabs in a 5 gallon bucket, right? If a crab tries to leave, the other ones are going to pull it down, you know. And but what we have right now is an unprecedented time in history where we're going to have free passage. Like all those tools that have been used to keep us are now disempowered, shut off. Their power is being removed. So now's the time to make a run for it, folks. And in the past, it's sometimes taken people, oh, it might take them 13 lifetimes to get through this because you have to gather all these things and overcome all these obstacles. But now it's never been easier. But the key is we're doing it collectively, which means if we do it in groups, it's going to be much easier. Just like, you know, traveling in a caravan, you know, like I live in Oregon, and people who came across the plains, they traveled in groups because it's easier to survive when you're in a group. So I'll just lay that out as these three basic elements. And now I want to just point to what are the key elements within a meta narrative that is going to be helpful. Okay. So first of all, we have to find the right meta narrative, and then we need to use that meta narrative well, because we're not just going to be able to sit here and go, oh, because I'm a good person, someone's going to pick me up and put me over in 5D, because that would be another example of just waiting for a hero to do it. We still need to make the journey. It's going to be easier now than ever, and especially if we do it collectively and we do it as a group. But this is the pathway. So before I go on to the next step, what questions do we have about this layout between 3D, 4D, and 5D?
Picking the right meta narrative.
Yeah, picking the right meta narrative.
So a meta narrative is 3, curiosity, non-judgmental, and lightheartedness.
Yeah. So like if we see a story, I mean, here's the thing. Almost all the fairy stories, almost all the fairy tales are meta narratives that talk about this journey. But even those meta narratives, they can be turned into 3D meta narratives. For example, you look at all the fairy tales and look what Disney, you know, Disney is great at taking these stories of freedom, and they're turned into stories of victim, villain, hero. Because if you look at them, it's not about, you know, the princess is usually the soul or the anima, if the main character is a male, or if the main character is a female, then the prince is the soul. And this is the whole fairy tale is about becoming whole with your unconscious. And like Sleeping Beauty, you know, Sleeping Beauty is not about waiting for somebody to come kiss you and save you. You know, it's about, you know, it's about how, you know, first of all, you've got these 12 fairies and you invite the 13th one, because if you don't invite the 13th one, there's going to be a curse, right? Because the 13th one is the maybe less liked one, but it's also the necessary one. And then it's, you know, we do all these things to avoid the prophecy, but the very actions that avoid it fulfill it. And then we have this period of like 100 years, which maps to like 100 years of solitude, 100 years of not being aware of our soul, and of being like under a glass coffin and just sleeping. We're not dead, but we're sleeping. And this represents the time where we're not aware of our soul. We don't realize that there's another half to us, right? But when we endure that period long enough and we wake up, then the whole kingdom wakes up, right? And it's this union of the conscious ego and the unconscious soul. So that's what I mean. Like the same story, Sleeping Beauty can either be told as a 5D journey, or it can be told as a reinforce the 3D narrative, right? So it's also one good guide is find the oldest version of the story possible, right? Because it's less likely to be shifted. Or even Christ's story. Look at all the Gnostic texts that were eliminated and communities were massacred because they were using them. And then all of a sudden they emerge. So, for example, the Gnostic texts are going to be a lot more reliable as meta narratives into the 5D than are the texts that were carefully revised by the Roman Empire. And what was the Roman Empire interested in? Keeping everyone subject. They wanted to be the one sovereign over the entire world. So, it's not that the Christian Bible, you can still find a lot of truth in it, but you also realize that a lot of the ascension ingredients have been removed from and twisted. So yeah, but let's go to this next factor, because we're gonna see these things. These are the things that keep us in that 3D thinking. If we have a judging mind, it's going to keep us locked in 3D. If we have a blaming heart, blaming weighs down our heart and makes our heart heavy, right? And even the Egyptian, the hall of Ma'at, right? If someone's going to pass through and ascend, their heart is going to be taken out and weighed against a feather. And if their heart is lighter than a feather, then they can pass. And if their heart is heavier than a feather, then they're not going to be able to go to 5D yet. And what weighs down our heart? Blame weighs down our heart. And it doesn't matter whether it's self-blame or other blame. So any story that's telling us how to lighten our heart, any story that's telling us how to let go of the blame. Because if you listen to enough stories, you realize, oh, I've been in all those roles. If we're looking for perfection, if we're looking for puritanical absence of any sin, no one is going to pass through. So it's impossible. So coming into this lack of blame gives us a light heart. If we see each judgment we have is like a stone, just like the stones that people were holding and they were about to stone the adulterer that they brought to Jesus. Like if we have stones in our hands, they're like in our hearts, oh, we're going to judge her, she's a sinner. Then our heart is not light enough. Maybe we go, oh, I won't judge her, but I am sure an asshole. I don't deserve to go through. Well, if you don't think you deserve to go through, if you're still holding judgment, then you can't go through. It's not like someone else is judging you. They're just weighing. Does that make sense? So, see, I think I just put back here. But the other thing that is required is in this cauldron, we need to have desire. Desire is what fuels the whole thing. And so many religious traditions have gone to where they just value the upper chakras, like the pure chakras, the thinking chakra, the throat, and the mind, and the crown. Let's call it the blue chakras, blue to purple range chakras. And we don't like the red chakras, right? But if we cut off our desire, if we say, well, sometimes my root chakra, my red chakra, and my sexual chakra, my orange chakra, and my power chakra, well, those often turn into just lust and greed and manipulation. So let's just get rid of them altogether, right? And so what we do is, instead of this lower cauldron, we just throw a bucket of water on it and put the fire out completely. But that doesn't work. We need the whole self. Or if you want to see it in terms of a snake, you've got the head of the snake and you've got the tail of the snake and you've got the heart of the snake. But we're always cutting off the tail of the snake, or if the head of the snake gets corrupt, we cut off the head of the snake. And so we never get that full Ouroboros snake where it's able to kiss its tail. So cold desire, or what Gerard calls mimetic desire, which is, well, I don't know what I desire. So I'm just going to imitate someone else's desire. Mimetic is to imitate. And that's the cause of conflict because, well, I don't know what I want. Everyone seems to want a house. Well, and someone's wanting that house. So maybe I'll fight him for that house, or I'll fight him for that land, or I'll fight, I don't know who I like, but everyone seems to like her. So I'm going to fight him for her. And conflict is born out of not knowing what we really desire. There's plenty to go around for everybody if we all just pursue what we desire, right? So instead, these stories help us move from a cold or mimetic desire to a hot, authentic desire. And Christ even said, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. And the Alpha is that eros love. The Omega is that unconditional agape love. Jesus didn't say, I'm just all about agape, just agape, agape, sacrifice, sacrifice, do everything for everybody else, forget about yourself. No, he said, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, right? And so by turning on our desire, but making sure it's authentic, and then helping those desires integrate and align with our heart and our head. So we turn on our authentic desire, we become aware of it, and we give it permission to live. And then the second stage is to be blameless, not to be blameless without sin, but to be blameless without judgment, right? And Jesus was always the one he spoke most harshly against were those that were the Puritans, the Pharisees, the scribes. They were trying to just follow these rules, follow these rules. We follow these rules. You follow these rules. If you don't follow these rules, we're going to punish you and maybe kill you and maybe stone you, right? And he kind of said to them, hey, if you even have a lustful thought, you're committing adultery. If you even hate your brother, you're committing murder. So nobody's perfect. Nobody's pure in that sense. But the whole idea of blameless is looking at a blameless heart, which is a light heart. So it doesn't mean that we're not going to veer from the path. The snake always winds. It goes a little bit too much, a little too little, a little too much, a little too little. And then eventually it gets its way to the top. But we're always going to be off the mark as we get our way up. And then the mind, instead of judging, is about just being curious, hearing the story, entering the story of the villain, the story of the victim, the story of the hero, and realizing that everybody has all three of those and that I am everybody. Does that make sense? So it's this when I come full circle and I realize that no one is an absolute villain, no one's an absolute hero, no one's an absolute victim, then I'm able to finally set my mind free and be curious, which helps my heart be light, which helps everything be in alignment. Okay. So these are the traits that are going to get us into 5D right here. Now traditions have a lot more detail, but if we're looking for a story to be a good seaworthy boat to get us across from one side of the lake to the other, they're going to have this effect on people who actually enter into them. All right. So let's just pause for a second for questions about that.
I have a question about the framework. Excuse me. So on the left, I think I just blinked when you maybe said it. On the left side, the judging mind, blaming, cold, desire. Is that 3D? And then the right side, the right side is 5D?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Just for my reference,
and then,
which makes sense, but I just wanted to.
4D is the story and also songs and symbols and dances. Those are the things that are go beyond the literal that are going to help us make that journey, because it's kind of a journey through the dark. It's a journey where we can't rely on our thinking. Our thinking mind is not equipped to get us over there. In fact, the more we rely on our thinking mind, the more we're going to be stuck on one side.
Okay. I appreciate you adding that piece about songs and dances and beyond the literal. It reminds me also of what you would talk about Imaginese, the language of Imaginese. It is symbolism or archetypes or something that's just not purely literal.
Right. And that's our problem. If we've come to not even trust, we don't believe that stories have any reality. We say, oh, that's just fiction, or that's just a myth. Myth has even become synonymous for something that's false. Whereas myth anything that's in that realm of the symbolic and the metaphoric, and then it's speaking the language, as you say, of imaginees. It's speaking the language of images. And this is why alchemy, you read alchemy texts and it seems really confusing if you're trying to read it literally, and it's full of symbols, because it's the symbols are something we can carry in our heart, and it's the language of the heart, and it's the heart that is going to be pulling all this together. The heart is the center of this. So if we're trying to live in our head, we're going to fail. We're going to be afraid of having our head cut off.
It reminds me of prayer as well, which I'm kind of new to, but I get in that state when I'm praying.
To a heart state is what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm willing to let go of the literal reality to imagine or hope for, pray for something beyond it.
Right. And prayer, especially like contemplative prayer, like heart-centered prayer. There's prayer that's just like, hey, God, could you help me do this and help me do that and get more money, get this job. Like that's more the petition prayer, but the contemplative prayer is taking us to the heart, and it's holding us in that space where two things can be opposite and held in that cauldron together. That's why the heart is such a magical space, and it's the center of us all. If we don't have the heart, if it's just always the head biting the tail, then we'll just go back and forth, between the blue cutting off the tail, and then the blue gets corrupt, and then the tail comes and cuts off the head, and then the head gets corrupt, and then the tail gets corrupt, and the head comes and cuts off the tail, and it's just this constant battle. It's this Hunger Games. It's this beauty. Beauty is down here, truth is up here, and if we think it's beauty or truth, that very question is a trap question, and it keeps us from finding that in our heart can hold the beauty and the truth, the bat, beauty and truth, bat. That's why we're entering into these bat games to help us dream of bat worlds, like of 5D worlds. What's it going to look like? So the more that we're like at this stage of revelation, there's already been a whole lot of revelations. There's going to be more revelations coming. Some might even be more shocking than what we've already seen. And we could either choose to respond by everybody coming out with our pitchforks and, rioting against something. You notice that almost 100% of riots are against something. They're rarely for something. Like, what are we for? What if we just all came together and said, well, what kind of world, what kind of beautiful and true world do we want, so that we can stop cutting off our tail or our head, because we're one snake. We're not really separate. That's the biggest illusion that we've been living under for thousands and thousands of years, is that we're separate. And yes, we have our distinct perspectives, that we hold, but those are fluid. And especially over the course of many lifetimes, like we get to be men and women and Africans and Europeans and Egyptians and South Americans and indigenous, and all these different lives that we've lived. It doesn't make sense for us to identify with just one of them, just the one that we happen, the costume that we happen to be wearing right now, the mask that we happen to be playing. Nothing to validate the mask, and it's not like ego's a bad thing. It's only when we attach to that ego that we are then able to go, oh, I'm with the good ones, and I got to help get rid of the bad ones, or I'm just going to be neutral and let others take care of the bad ones. But either way, it all ends with pitchforks and, a tragedy where, like a Shakespearean tragedy where, 90% of the people are dead on the stage at the end of the play, because we didn't take time to hear the stories, to lighten our hearts, to really desire what we desire, and to get curious about it. Okay. So with that in mind, let's just pick a story. We could pick any story. We could even, here's the funny thing, even nursery rhymes, in a sense, give us like What's beautiful about a nursery rhyme? A nursery rhyme, we can memorize them by heart. And we don't have to think about them. But even something as simple as row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Even something as simple as that can help us remember, oh, row, row, row your boat. Stay in the flow. Don't go to the shore of rigidity and too much security, or don't go to the side of too much freedom, too chaotic, where I want freedom and I don't want anyone else to have freedom, and that's chaos. But I'm going to flow down that river. I'm just going to row, and I'm going to be merrily, 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 merrily. It's just light, lighthearted, 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 laughing. And remember, oh yeah, life is but a dream. So I'll just, pick up got a bunch of books here. Here's one I just picked up, which is Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. And there's Alice, and she's looking through the looking glass. And what she does is she goes through the looking glass, and she has this whole adventure. She's like, well, I wonder what that world on the other side of the looking glass is doing. I can only see so much of it. I'd sure like to see what's going on. And she goes in there, and she finds Humpty Dumpty, and she finds Twiddledee and Tweedledum, and she finds the red knight and the white knight and the white king and the red king. And she learns from Tweedledee and Tweedledum that the red king is dreaming all of us. He's even dreaming you, Alice. Says, he can't be dreaming me. Oh, yes, he's dreaming all of us. And she's intrigued by that thought that, well, the king is dreaming us. But then at the end, she comes back out and she wakes up and she realizes she was kind of having a dream. And now she's back in her living room and she's telling her cat about this. And she's saying, oh, I don't know. I dreamed the Red King, but the Red King was dreaming me. So who's dreaming who, right? So the true reality is that we have two sides of the looking glass. We have the dreaming and we have the seeming. The side that we're on, it seems like it's more real. But when we're in a dream, that seems like it's more real. And then we wake up and then this seems like it's more real. What Carl Jung says is that we have to get both those sides, the unconscious and the conscious, to be aware of each other. And when you look, you're not just looking at your reflection, you're looking at your other twin, right? And if so that's why a story like The Looking Glass Through the Looking Glass is a great meta narrative for going into 5D, because it challenges all the things that we take as being normal, and it sort of flips them on the head. Like Humpty Dumpty says, oh, we get birthday presents every unbirthday. So 364 days out of the year, we get a birthday present. You only get them every birthday. Wouldn't you rather get a present every unbirthday? So it's sort of the inverse, but that inverse reality, the dreaming world, really exists. And that dreaming world creates this one, and this one creates the other one. So I invite us just to kind of sit with all that and think about, well, does it seem possible that our whole collective consciousness could move from a world where we're always fighting, we're always playing the Hunger Games, we're always playing the war games, whether it's in school or whether it's at work or whether it's in our community, it's always the Hunger Games, putting one against the other, and to keep us from actually all realizing that we're divine. Does it seem possible that we could all reach that level of divinity?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is possible in a 5D world?
Ooh.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
yeah, go ahead.
well, actually, I would rather, I guess, hear a more general answer to that. I have a specific scenario, but yeah.
Oh, a specific scenario is great. Go ahead.
Well, as an oncology nurse, lately I've been wondering if curing your leukemia or lymphoma is possible in a 5D world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because we create our reality. And the only reason we have these diseases is because we think we have to, right? And so it's not a limitation, it's really a limitation of our thinking. And this is why people can be healed just by the mind, because the mind, if the mind thinks it's real, it is real. If it really, if you align all of these, if you align the mind, the heart, and the gut, then that is sort of the elixir. That is the holy grail, which is you can ask for whatever you want, right? So that's the beauty. That's the promise. That's the, that's the payoff is you can dream whatever you want to dream and it becomes a reality. And the only limitation is, as long as it's not violating someone else's sovereignty. Like can't just like dream of like going and controlling everybody else's world. So it's kind of like the flower of life. Everyone is at the center of their own world and no one is at the center of someone else's world. And the problem with this 3D world is there's been a whole series of, well, wouldn't it be great if I could not only control my world, but I could also control thousands or millions of others, right? And in that attempt to control others, it limits other people's ability to dream and it limits other people's ability to be healed. But really, it's not, nothing is imposed by someone or forced on by someone else because we have to accept it ourselves. It's just if they make a convincing enough case and we believe them, then okay. Like if we all collectively went, okay, we're not going to have any more debt. We're just going to have a jubilee. We're not going to have taxes. We're all going to have health. We have free energy. You can create whatever you want to create. It seems impossible because it's impossible in the 3D world because we're not aligned and we're holding on to these rocks. But in the 5D world, that's reaching this level of what's called immortality because not even death is real because you can have your head cut off and just put on a new head.
I'm guessing that what you're describing is a collective 5D world and not so much an individual 5D world. Like, could an individual be in a 5D but still be living within this 3D reality of having to pay the PG&E bill and, all those
Yes.
mundane things?
Yes.
But what you're talking about is a collective. I think that's how I hear it. But tell me.
It can happen at the individual level. And that's why there's just been these few mystics or like a Buddha or a Jesus. Like, why are they able to do miracles, right?
Mm.
Because they are seeing beyond this reality, right? And the problem is if someone, the powers that are trying to control people, when they see people coming in and giving away the secret that you can just dream things into reality, that's very subversive to keeping people, locked in. Because the truth is people aren't really locked in this prison. There are exits. It's just that the exits have been hidden really well. And anyone who finds a way out, why do you think the Cathars were this group of people that practiced this in the 14th, 12th, 13th century? And why do you think the Roman Catholic Church sent a crusade against them and spent several years tracking them down and then wiping them out and then burning them at the stake, father, mother, and child, because it was very dangerous, right? So there have been individuals. So, but the beautiful thing is we're reaching this point where we can do this as a collective, right? It used to be you could only do it individually because, there were some, you basically, if you have just a few people who have this secret, then they can be writing the stories and writing the histories and telling the news and telling the past in such a way that they're the heroes and that this sort of thing is not possible. So yeah, it's Monica, there are people there have been many mystics and prophets throughout history. They've kind of had to keep a low profile. And as soon as they get too big of a profile, you notice they usually disappear. So that's what's so exciting about right now is that we're on the verge of being able to do it together, right? But we still need to get in the boats, And then, and it's not like it's going to be one big boat. I think it's going to be a bunch of boats of maybe 12 people or 20 people or 144 people, but communities doing this, right? And communities, helping each other remember that we're all divine, helping us remember that we don't need to blame, and helping teach people that haven't learned this wisdom, this gnosis, this heart knowledge, teaching them without punishing them, or teaching them without just giving them the answers, without understanding the wisdom beneath it. So I'm just going to invite us, with that being said, like if we were to, Alice is told by the white queen, she says, I recommend practicing thinking up impossible things, because all these things are impossible if we're stuck in 3D, but they're possible. The impossible things can be created by thinking outside of this 3D box. And that very desiring of something impossible is what's going to help us get to 5D. So I'm going to invite us, let's just, as a fun little exercise, let's just each think of one or two impossible things that you would desire to have. What would be one of your first or second, or just one of your desires if you got to go over and be in charge of the dreaming, the creating, the co-creating of the world? And that's the thing. We're not just going to go into this paradise that's created for us, because how boring would that be? We don't like things that are just like an amusement park made for us, right? We want to have the freedom to co-create. So what would be something that some impossible things, something that seems impossible in this world, in this 3D world, that you would desire and wish for and see manifest? What's one impossible thing, or two impossible things?
I would like to live in the past, like generations back, the 1800s, just for the experience, but then also have an episode in the future, far in the future.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about time is that it's only in the 3D world that we draw time out and we think that the past is back there and the future is over there. In reality, in our unconscious, all time is present at once. And so that's going to be completely possible. It'd be as easy as, like, just like you go up to Colorado to go skiing, you're like, I'm going to go over to the 1800s just to, I'd like to, be in a saloon and play some cards and, rough it up a little bit, right? But that and you could even have a duel at noon, but that you're not killing that person. That we're just playing, right? Kind of like Westworld. It's like this, like anything is possible. And you're like, oh, I wonder what it'd be like, to live in the jungle and just live in trees. I wonder what that would be like. Or, and just like you visit different places, like time and space aren't a different thing. It's time, space. It's just traveling. And the beauty of 5D is you're not going to even require an airplane to travel. You just travel in your rainbow light body, the same rainbow light body that Christ got and many of the Tibetans got, and dozens of ascension seekers have gotten this light body, which is like a little personal, UFO, ability to just fly, So yeah, that's totally what seems impossible here is completely possible. Paul, any impossible thing you'd?
Well, what ever since I was a kid, I thought, what if, and my ancestor actually did this, for a couple of years. What if when the Europeans got here, they said, hey, these people seem to have a great plan here. Let's just abandon our Puritanism, our Catholicism, our religion, and let's just do like them. They've got it figured out.
Yeah.
And my first ancestor, he came in 1606, and they left him. He was like 14 or 15 years old, and they left him to go live with the Mi'kmaq for 2 years. He actually did it. Can you imagine being 15 years old and saying, oh, you got to go live with the Mi'kmaq? It's like, oh, yeah, hunting, fishing all day? Great. Sign me up. Yeah, I wish they'd
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. And the other thing I think about, like more in modern times, is like, we don't have to change, we don't have to fight about capitalism or communism. If we could just do the accounting accurately, any of these systems would work fine.
Yeah.
If we could value life and environment, and if we could value beyond money and do things that way, would be great, huh?
Yeah. Well, and money is just a form of exchange of energy. And it's just this fear that I'm going to run out, which causes us to hoard. And then the hoarding and the charging of interest and all this is just what creates all these inequities. So especially once we realize, hey, energy is free, it's in the plasma, it's unlimited.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to, like Christ said, consider the lilies of the valley. They're not worried about what they're going to wear, but they're dressed better than Solomon.
That's funny. I just watched that movie the other night, Lilies of the Field,
Oh,
with
cool.
Sidney Poitier.
Nice.
Yeah.
So all this to say, I'm going to invite us. This is just sort of laying the groundwork. I'm going to invite us. We're going to pick different stories. Like one I imagine we'll do soon could be like Never Ending Story, because it shows us how to go into a story and use that story as a entrance into the fantasia or the dreaming world, where you get to dream whatever you want. And there's also these portals that he has to pass through. And they're basically just saying, hey, do you have authentic desire? Do you have confidence in yourself? And if not, you're not going to pass. And oh, by the way, do you have a blameless heart? Can you look at the mirror and see the dark side of yourself and not run away? And once you do that, it's just, those are two of the key portals. And then you just follow the story. And before you know it, you're in 5D. And now you have the baton. You have the baton to start writing the story and writing the myths. So we're going to be practicing this, coming together in different sessions. We'll call them bat games, because it's practicing how do we imagine, let's co-dream beautiful and true worlds. Like everything that each of you have mentioned, I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Right. And if we're really thinking in this both and beautiful and true way, we realize everyone can really dream their own dreams and also be in this collective where we're not by ourselves, where we're enjoying each other, and we're finding those who want to go fish will go fish, and those who want to go fly around, and they can go fly around. Those who want to go to the 1800s together, hey, let's go play around there for a while. But it's basically this beautiful pursuit of curiosity, So be looking for, I'm going to be sending out a link. I'd like for you to I've got a whole site for you to just sign up and say, here's what I'm interested in. Here's the type of back games I'd be interested in. Here's the type of stories I'd be interested in. And we can just be practicing this, and we're basically practicing moving into getting this world, this 5D up and running, because right now it's like it needs settlers, right? It needs people to start dreaming. So anyone up for joining the dream team? Who would like to be part of the dream team, right? Because it's going to catch, and instead of fighting left or right, or blue or red, or this person's a hero or this person's a villain, we just sort of leave that whole conversation and start dreaming the next world. So, all right, this has been beautiful. It's been fun. Thank you very much.
Ooh.
And to be continued, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Yeah.
night.
Have a great night.
Yeah, that was move the ball down the field.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks a lot, you guys.